Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my best friend, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Tracy. Hey, everybody. We ready for another one?
We are ready. So, this is Season 1, Episode 7. Andrew Kehoe, the first school bomber massacre in the United States. I'm going to start this episode with a little history on Bath, Michigan, where Andrew Kehoe made history, but the history he made here is something many who are still alive wish they could forget. According to Wikipedia, Bath Township was originally organized in 1839 as Ossawa Township. It was split from DeWitt Township by the governor and was renamed Bath Township after Bath, New York in 1843. The township has a land area of 31.83 square miles, with 3.2 square miles of it being water. In the early 1900s, a popular place to be was Park Lake Dance Pavilion. It was an entertainment venue built over the water pilings. Tommy Dorsey, an American jazz trombonist, composer, conductor, and bandleader of the big band era, even played here. But sadly, the pavilion no longer exists as it burned down in 1930. Bath is directly north of East Lansing, where Michigan State University is located. When thinking of Bath, Michigan, the only thing I knew about it were a couple of golf courses. One is Hawk Hollow and the other is Eagle Eye. However, there is one man who made a significant mark in history, and that man is named Andrew Philip Kehoe. Andrew is responsible for the deadliest school massacre, which, quote, is the deadliest act of mass murder in a school in the United States history. It claimed 3 times as many victims as Columbine High School massacre and twice as many victims as the Virginia Tech and the Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings.
Okay, Tracy. We're back to kids dying again. WTF.
I know. It's crazy.
All jokes aside, do we have any murderers, mass murderers, that don't kill children? After these episodes, do we have any coming up? I mean, you know.
Well, we're going to stay away from the kids again, but this one, this is one of those historical ones, so I can't help it. This is a really good one. This is a really good one, but it's bad. It's good,
Okay.
But it's bad.
All right, I'm going to go along with it. I just had to put it out there.
I know, and
I'm just a sucker. It makes me want to hang him by his toes, and I don't even know the story yet.
I know.
And it can't be a gun thing because we're talking about the 1930s. No, when are we talking about? 1800s?
We're in the early 1900s, 1927 to be exact.
All right, so it's not going to be a gun thing, so we're not going to have all that trigger stuff.
We're not going to have guns.
Shush, I won't get ahead of myself. Go ahead.
Okay. On Wednesday, May 18th, 1927, 45 people were murdered, including Andrew Kehoe and the school superintendent. 38 of those were children, most of them under the age of 12. 58 people were injured. The initial bombing occurred in the basement of the school, and a secondary bombing occurred out front of the school. To this day, this is the largest school massacre and first suicide bombing ever recorded in U.S. history. There's a historical marker sign in Bath at the Bath School Memorial Park that reads, quote, "The destruction of the Bath Consolidated School shared the front page of national newspapers, such as the New York Times, alongside Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight." The headline on May 19, 1927 read, quote, "Maniac blows up school, had protested high taxes." Before I get into the gritty details of the Bath School massacre bombing, let's dial it back to learn who Andrew Kehoe was before he unleashed his unbridled devastation on the people and the children of Bath. Andrew Philip Kehoe was born on February 1st, 1872, in Tecumseh, Michigan. His father, Philip, who had immigrated from Ireland to America as a young boy, was married to Mary. Together they had 13 children. After 6 girls, Andrew was born, and with being the firstborn son, he received special treatment from his father. As Andrew grew up, he would often be found in the barn tinkering and experimenting with electricity. Andrew attended Tecumseh High School After graduation, he then attended Michigan State College, which we know as Michigan State University. While at the college, Andrew studied electrical engineering. It was also at Michigan State College where Andrew met Ellen Price, but everybody called her Nellie. She was the daughter of a wealthy family of Lansing, and in the future would become Mrs. Andrew Kehoe. Andrew's mother, Mary, had passed away when he was just 18 years old. He stayed around and helped on the farm where they had cattle, sheep, and hogs. In 1898, Andrew left Michigan for St. Louis, Missouri, where he worked as an electrician and a lineman, which meant he was hiking up poles. While working in a city park, Andrew got quite a zap of electricity and had a wicked fall, which he suffered a substantial head injury that landed him in the hospital for a couple of weeks as he was in and out of consciousness. When he was able to, Andrew returned home to Michigan and moved back in with his father on the farm. It was noted that Andrew's personality had completely changed, and I'm not surprised with him having suffered a traumatic brain injury from his fall back in St. Louis, especially if he had any frontal lobe damage, as this is the area of the brain that dictates your personality.
Okay, so we're already giving him an out,
Yep.
saying that he was a little bit challenged. Okay, all right, going.
Okay. Upon returning home, Andrew discovered that his father was remarried to a woman named Frances Murphy Wilder. According to an article I read, neighbors would frequently hear Andrew and Frances screaming at one another. Andrew now also had a new stepsister. He wasn't happy about that, and at some point, Andrew killed her cat. In the early 1900s, gas stoves started making an appearance. They were replacing coal and wood-burning stoves in the kitchen. In 1907, the Natural Gas Association of America held their annual meeting. One of its members made the following statement, quote, "This method of burning gas should be condemned merely from the fact that we get gas direct, and there is a danger to life in getting any gas direct in your room," end quote.
Okay, you're starting to talk about gas, and we're just going to roll over the fact that he killed her cat. We're not going to make any deal about the fact that he's got a major head injury, he already screaming and yelling, and he killed a cat. How old is he at this point that he kills his cat? Did you say?
He's got to be like in his early 20s because he's back from St. Louis. He left when he was about 18 and he was gone for a couple of years. And I was surprised that I didn't hear you go on about the cat. But here it is. So let's talk about the cat.
Well, you were on a roll and then you went straight into gas stoves. I thought you were going to say more things that he did, but then you went straight into gas stoves. So he killed the cat. Okay, serial killer tendencies here.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's getting information about gas. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. I'm feeding you.
Just to summarize for our listeners, head injury, cat killer, learning about gas.
About gas. And there's a reason why I gave a little education about when gas stoves started making their appearance in kitchens.
Okay, I got you. I'm following.
All right, keep tracking. According to the podcast This Is Monsters, on September 17th, 1911, Frances went into the house to make dinner for the family. When she lit that stove, it exploded, covering her in fuel and oil. It is believed that Andrew had tinkered with the stove, which caused the explosion. Andrew ran to the kitchen and just stood there, sadistically watching her burn. He finally grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on her, which only made things worse. Ever hear that oil and water don't mix? Well, the water just spread the fuel and oil, which made the fire even worse. I'm thinking maybe some flour or a blanket would have been the better option, but Andrew opted for water. I wonder why.
Because he knew better. This is the stepsister that he didn't like?
No, this is his stepmother. He didn't like any of them. But now this is the stepmother he's after.
Oh, okay. So he burnt his stepmother on purpose, it seems. It seems at this point.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
That's what we're saying.
Okay.
That's the inference we're taking on this one. Frances's skin basically turned to liquid and melted off her body. Finally, Andrew's father appeared, and between the two of them, they were able to snuff out the fire and put Frances in bed. Andrew was then sent up the street to the nearest neighbor's house, as the Kehoes didn't have a phone. When Andrew arrived, he asked the resident to call a doctor. When the neighbor asked if anyone was hurt, Andrew simply and flatly said, "Franny got burned." Before he turned to leave, he said, "Could you also call a priest?" With her skin gone and her flesh melted down to the bone, Frances only survived a couple of hours. She died on September 18th, 1911. With the reputation of the gas stoves bursting into flames, her death was ruled an accident. Now, how about that, Christine?
Well, isn't that coincidental? Super coincidental. And can we just, for a second, talk about this poor woman, that she stayed alive for hours in that condition? Patients that have had first, second, third degree burns. And it doesn't matter. They're in excruciating pain for the first day or so until the nerve endings kind of give up, so to speak. Clinically, that's not the best way to put it, but in layman's terms, that's what happens. You get burnt, it hurts real bad for a while, and then your nerve endings go dead. This woman's skin melted from her body. So I'm imagining she probably had third degree burns everywhere, fourth degree.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. The pain that she was in for all this time, what a horrible way to go.
Very, very horrible.
And when she was engulfed in flames, for him to just stand there silently, that the father just wanders in, like there was no commotion.
Right.
What?
I know. Maybe he was out feeding the hogs. I don't know. He was busy. He was busy out on the field.
I just needed to take a second and just say, oh my God, for this woman.
I know. All. And I've heard that. I've never taken care of burn victims, thankfully, because I've heard it's just gut-wrenching to do it because they are in so much pain.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
No, it's brutal. It's a brutal, brutal thing. My heart goes out to all burn victims.
Yeah, mine too, sure.
It's horrible. So my brain just immediately went to, oh my God, she survived for hours afterwards. Like it would have been more humane for her to just pass away and go quickly at that time. I mean, in the 1920s, this is right? No, 1911.
Yeah.
There was no narcotics or anything to help her.
She's just laying on the couch or the bed, wherever they placed her. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. Her body must have just been screaming. That's insanely brutal. Killing a cat and now burning his stepmother to death. Liquefied her skin.
We're off to a hearty start.
I know. It's chock full of crazy stuff here. All right, so Frances, the stepmother that burned to death, was only 52 years old. Per Find a Grave, she is buried at St. Dominic's Catholic Cemetery in Clinton, Lenawee County in Michigan, Section B, Row 2. Her tombstone simply reads, Frances Murphy Kehoe, nothing more. The occupation listed on her death certificate showed her occupation as a housewife, with a cause of death as burns from gas stove. On May 14th, 1912, Andrew married Ellen Price, the one I talked about earlier that everybody called her Nellie. They finally married. Andrew was now, at this point, 40, and Nellie was 37 years old. So, wait a sec. He was much older when he came home then.
Yeah, probably.
Much older than I thought. I kind of focused more on St. Louis, but he was gone for a handful of years, so he had gone, I can't remember the other state he was in, but there was nothing significant about him being in the other state, so he was gone there for a handful of years, and then he was in St. Louis for a handful of years. But it must have been quite a handful because he's in his early 20s, and now he's 40 in 1912.
Yeah, so it's not like he was a 20-something-year-old kid and murdered his stepmother. And it just points out that this is just another clue to a not-so-sane human being, that he is 40 years old at the time that he's getting married in the early 1900s, which it was like blasphemous if you were unmarried by the time you were 30.
Yeah, at that age, right? For certain.
Yeah, so Nellie was 37, so she was a spinster.
She was. You legit took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say she was a spinster.
Yeah, so Nellie just married him because she had probably no other choice.
She had no other choice. She's like, all right, let's do it.
Oh, poor child.
I'm getting old.
Poor child.
I know it. They resided at Andrew's father's farm in Tecumseh, where Andrew continued to help his father on the farm, while Nellie basically became the caretaker of Philip and Frances's daughter, you know, the one who Andrew killed her cat. And if you're wondering what happened with Andrew's stepsister, I must tell you, I have no idea what happened to her. I did not see anything in any of the materials that I was reading of anything further with this little girl, so I don't know.
I'll tell you what happened to her. He killed her cat, and then he killed her mom. She was like, deuces, I'm out.
Yeah, she's like 11. She's like, I'm getting married. I'm getting out of here.
Exactly.
In the early 1900s, it was common practice on farms to clear their land of boulders and large tree stumps and create trenches with something called pyritol. Now, pyritol is a smokeless explosive that became widely available, I must say, after World War I. And it was reprocessed from, a surplus from the military. Pyritol was inexpensive and could be purchased in 50-pound boxes. That's important. In 1915, Philip Kehoe, Andrew's dad, he died, leaving Andrew as the executor of the estate. Both Andrew and Nellie remained on the farm for a couple more years until her uncle passed away. Nellie's uncle had an 80-acre farm in Bath, which was now for sale for $12,000. Andrew and Nellie put down $6,000 and took out a loan for the remaining $6,000. A lot of the townspeople still remembered Nellie as she had grown up in Bath. Now, I did know earlier in the show that her family at the time, when she was in college, they were living in Lansing, but she grew up in Bath.
Can we just talk a second at the fact of the prices of these things? He had acres and acres. He had a big old farm and a house and probably sheds and animals and all this for $12,000. Mm-hmm. You cannot even buy a scooter nowadays for $12,000. 100 years later, and we have multiplied that by 1 million.
Mm-hmm. If you just go to the grocery store, you're going to spend $100 on supplies for one meal to feed a family.
Exactly. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just needed to take a second since you threw out, money. In 1915, large farm.
80 acres.
$12,000.
80 acres for $12,000. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? Mm-hmm. So the citizens of Bath welcomed both Andrew and Nellie into the community. Other farmers did find Andrew to be a bit odd. For example, normally when you're farming your land, you are dressed in overalls and work boots, and farming is a dirty job. However, Andrew would be seen in the fields on his tractor, dressed in a suit, tie, and dress shoes. If he got any dirt on his clothes, he would immediately change into fresh, clean clothes, then head back out into the field. So Nellie was doing a lot of laundry.
Not only that, but we're also putting on OCD onto his litany of mental handicaps.
I want you to keep track of his diagnoses because they're going to add up.
Oh my God, I have so many already.
Yeah. So the people of Bath initially thought Andrew was a nice man. He seemed helpful enough and would offer his hand if a neighbor needed it. But soon enough, people were starting to see that he also had a darker side. For example, Andrew and Nellie attended a local church on a regular basis. One day the priest had come to pay them a visit on the farm, and he asked Andrew for a sizable donation for the church. Now, I remember reading it was about $400. Andrew exploded with anger at the amount requested and told the priest to leave his property immediately. Andrew and Nellie never again attended service. On another occasion, Andrew purchased some cattle from his neighbor. Andrew was feeding his cows wet clover, which made them very sick, and they ended up dying. He skinned and sold all the hides. Then he went back to the neighbor he bought them from and demanded half of his money back. The neighbor refused, as the cows were all healthy when he sold them to him. Andrew was furious and felt that his neighbor had purposely sold him bad stock. On another occasion, a female neighbor approached Andrew while he was out working the land. She couldn't find her dog and asked if he had seen it. He calmly said yes, and very matter-of-factly said he'd seen the dog. It was barking, and it buried its bone over by my fence, so I shot it. He would also work his horses too hard, without giving them the proper rest they needed. When one of his horses was too tired to work, he literally beat it to death right there in the field. Here we are with a lack of empathy of a living animal. At this point in time, Andrew has killed his stepsister's cat, shot the neighbor's dog, killed his cows by feeding him wet clover, beat his horse to death, and let's not forget about killing of his stepmother. So he's got a long list.
Oh my God. This guy is lucky he's dead, because I would get a time machine and kill him if he didn't die. That's all I can say.
I would totally go with you. Let's go get him. Stop him before he does more damage. Andrew was elected to the board of directors of the Farm Bureau in 1921. Only 7 months later, he quit. He was looking for a more powerful role in the community. It was around this time that schools were getting an overhaul throughout the United States, breaking away from the one-room schoolhouses that peppered the land. Andrew possessed great bookkeeping skills, and coupled with his frugal nature, he decided that he would run to be the treasurer for the Bath Consolidated School Board. But it wasn't that Andrew really had a desire to be on the board for good. His goal was to have leverage when it came down to the levied tax increases related to the new school. After all, parting with a single coin would send him into a fit, and he and Nellie did not have any children, so why should he have to pay taxes, right?
Wrong. Wrong. It takes a village. Everybody needs to do that part. It doesn't matter if you have children or not. If you belong to the community, you have to give back to the community.
That's right.
Oh, this man is infuriating me, and I want to kill him. I just can't. I'm anticipating when he finally dies in this story. That's where I'm at right now. I mean, I tell you that I'm sensitive to the kids dying, so you give me a story not only where kids die in the end, but then you have 1 million animals dying also. What are you trying to do to me, Trace?
Trying to see how much you can take, I think.
Yeah, you're pushing it. This is animal torture. Okay, God. So he cons his way into getting up. Does he get the job at the school? Does he con his way into that?
He does. He is. So while on the school board, Andrew was holding a grudge against the school superintendent, and his name was Emery Hike. You see, Emery wanted to provide books and other supplies for the children, which of course would be paid by the taxpayers. This drove Andrew insane because this would increase the amount of money taxpayers, especially Andrew, would be responsible for. To get back at him, Andrew would purposely deny Hike his vacation request and would frequently just forget to give Hike his paychecks in a timely fashion. Andrew also became a handyman for the school, unofficially, which provided him access to get in whenever he needed or wanted to. By the time of the next election rolled around, Andrew was not nominated by his peers due to the angst that was palpable between him and Hike, the tensions that Andrew would bring to their meetings, and also because he was just plain difficult to work with. Now that he was off the school board, Andrew decided to run for Justice of the Peace. He lost miserably, which embarrassed and humiliated him.
Justice of the Peace, was that like a cop or was that like...
I'm thinking judge. Justice of the Peace.
That's the word I was searching for.
God.
That's a judge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you imagine him being a judge?
Oh my God. And that's why he lost miserably. Hello.
Yeah, people were like, no, you're crazy.
In his diagnosis file that he's straight up delusional.
Shortly after his defeat, Nellie had become so sick that she had to be hospitalized many times and soon was bedridden at home. She was having coughing fits and massive headaches. It was thought initially that it could be tuberculosis, but they chalked it up to asthma. Like, really?
How about poisoning? Hello? Poisoning? Anyone? Poisoning. Going once? Going twice? Poisoning?
Sold. The finances in the Kehoe household were dwindling as the farm was not doing well, and now with all the hospital bills, Andrew stopped making his mortgage payment altogether and had not made any payments for at least a few years. Finally, a foreclosure was issued, and when it was delivered to Andrew, he said if it wasn't for the school taxes, he would have made his payments. So it's never his fault for not paying his bills.
What is this guy's deal? Like, I know you haven't said much about it, except for that he was frugal and that he was cheap and that he lost his temper when anybody asked him for money. But he had to be making some money if he had an 80-acre farm. Well, I don't know. He keeps killing his animals, so maybe he wasn't making any money.
Also, he wasn't doing so good either. He didn't know how to work the land well, he did because he grew up on a farm, right?
Yeah.
But head trauma.
He knows how to run it. Is he not making any money, or is he doing something else with his money? And then the fact that his wife gets mysteriously sick with this ailment that they don't know what it is, poisoning.
Right.
So he's trying to get rid of her, probably because she's an expense. At least I'm just imagining from what I'm learning about this guy. What is the deal? What is he doing with all this money in 1915? Like, what is he doing?
He's holding on to it. He's a miser. He doesn't want anybody to have it.
Does he think he can get buried with it? What's he going to do with it?
Yeah, I think so. Put it in his coffin.
Okay. All right, delusional is on there as well. Okay, good.
Check. At this point, Andrew was about to completely lose his mind. He felt wronged by the community. He didn't like his neighbors. His wife was sick, and the medical expenses were out of control. His farm wasn't making any money, and of course, none of it was his fault. This is when Andrew formulated his plan to get back at everyone for all the wrongs done to him.
Isn't that always the way?
Mm-hmm. Sure is. Andrew did not own a vehicle, which at the time they called them machines. He would rely on his neighbors to drive him where he needed to go, even to buy groceries. So Andrew asked his neighbor if he would drive him to pick up some pyritol for the farm. So again, remember, that was a pretty common thing to clear boulders and large obstacles and whatnot. As I mentioned earlier in the show, this was not an uncommon practice. Just 6 ounces of pyritol was as powerful as an 8-ounce stick of dynamite, and it was much cheaper to boot. In all, Andrew purchased, get ready, 500 pounds of pyritol. When the neighbors heard of all the pyritol he had, they asked him if they could, get some from him, as they had large obstacles on their land that needed a good blasting to remove them. When they asked if he had any to spare, he flat out told them it was gone. Andrew's next purchase was now a flatbed truck machine. Andrew would make several more trips to gather as much pyritol and dynamite as he could get his hands on.
Okay, so nobody asked him any further questions on what he used 500 pounds of pyritol on? Nobody was wondering where it all went? They were just like, okay.
I think they were like, that doesn't sound right.
Didn't anybody get scared? It's like if I heard my neighbor had a wall full of guns, I think I'd be like, are you okay? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm going to bring you a fresh loaf of bread. Let's sit down.
But then again, back in the 1920s, you gotta admit that people just didn't butt into other people's business, right?
Yeah.
So even in the 1950s, from stories that I can remember, the old biddies talking about, you just didn't get involved in other people's business. So maybe it was a case of that. But I'm kind of feeling like 500 pounds of explosives should have raised an eyebrow. Like, did they have a cop in the area? Were there policemen back then? What the hell?
I think they probably had one.
The justice of the peace, being the judge,
he's all of them.
Jury.
Exactly. As Andrew so often did, he began tinkering around to figure how he could detonate his explosives. He came up with the idea of using an alarm clock to send an electric stimulus down the wires to detonate the pyritol. But how and when would he have the opportunity for a test run? Well, as luck would have it, New Year's Eve was just around the corner. As planned, when the clock struck midnight, as people were celebrating and ringing in the new year, the townspeople heard a thunderous boom and thought their town was under attack. But their worries were laid to rest, as what followed was silence. A few days later, a neighbor had seen Andrew and asked him if he had heard the loud boom on New Year's Eve. Andrew openly admitted it was him, and that he had wanted to ring in the new year with a boom. Andrew also mentioned that he used an alarm clock to go off at midnight to ignite the pyritol. He's very proud of it.
Oh my God. So he was out there with it. Like, he was telling people what he was doing, and nobody thought enough to be like, oh, but he's got 500 pounds of that stuff.
Right. Yeah, I'd be staying way away from the Kehoe farm.
That's crazy bananas.
During the spring of 1927, Nellie's condition was continuing to deteriorate, and at this point, I imagine she was emaciated and severely weak, as she had been losing weight throughout her illness, and remember, she was kind of bedbound at this point. Nellie continued to be in and out of the hospital throughout the spring. During this time, Andrew was asked if he would do some electrical work that needed to be done at the school. I'm certain he was more than happy to take this opportunity, as it allowed him to set his maniacal plan in place. Andrew would soon be making multiple trips to the school, pyritol, dynamite, blasting caps, an alarm clock in tow. Andrew was meticulously tucking explosives into the rafters of the basement ceiling and around its pipes. He left gasoline in containers and numerous sacks of gunpowder littered on the floor throughout the basement, all in plain sight for anyone to see.
That's bananas. It's like this guy just doesn't even care if he's caught.
Yeah. He's just doing it. He's going for it. Doesn't care. But it's like, didn't anybody ever go down there?
Yeah, maybe, I guess not. If he was the janitor, right? If he's the school, what did you call it? What was his title?
He was like a maintenance. He would do maintenance and electricity
Yeah.
work, electric work. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that janitorial, right?
Yeah,
So that's the janitor. The janitor does all the maintenance.
Yeah.
They don't just sweep up and throw out the garbage. They make sure everything's in working order.
Mm.
And especially back in that day when there wasn't that much to maintain, it was probably just him.
Yeah,
Like, so he
that's
probably
true.
was the only one down there.
Yeah, that's true. Now that everything was in place, and with the last day of school being the following day, it was time to act. Andrew had all the explosives in position. The alarm clock was set to go off at 8:45 a.m. when the kids were in the building. If all goes as planned, all in the school would be gone, and the entire school would be nothing but a pile of bodies, bricks, mortar, dust, and wood. Not only would he blow up the school, his plan was to also blow up his farm, including his farm equipment and his horses. The third blast would be his home. He was able to get away with planning and wiring with the explosives both at the home and at the school without having to answer to anyone, as Nellie was being cared for at her sister's for a while after her last hospitalization. However, for one reason or another, on May 18th, 1927, Nellie was back home on the farm with Andrew.
Oh, so did he send for her to have her be there for the big show?
I'm thinking he went and picked up his bride like, I got plans for you. Early the morning of the bombing, Andrew was running some errands in town. While he was out and about, the local blacksmith approached him and mentioned that there was an issue at the school regarding the water pump, which was located in the basement. Andrew was asked if he could come and take a look at it before classes started for that day. Andrew agreed, but when they got to the school, he looked at his watch and said that, it's almost time for school to start, and he left abruptly. As he was driving back to the farm, he saw many kids walking out of their homes, making their way towards school, and that just makes me so ill. He's just trucking back home.
He was waiting for them all to be there.
Mm-hmm. Like knowing that every one of those kids in his plan, his mind's eye, they were all going to be gone. Once home, Andrew retrieved a wheelbarrow and put Nellie's body into it. He wheeled her outside and left her in the wheelbarrow next to the chicken coop. On top of her body, he placed a metal box, and inside was their marriage certificate along with a pile of medical bills. Next, he went into the barn where he proceeded to tie the legs of his horses with wire so they couldn't run away if the barn's doors opened from the blast. Andrew now began to load up his truck with pyritol, dynamite, nails, shovels, nuts, bolts, basically anything and everything he could get his hands on to use for shrapnel. Finally, the day and time had come. It was 8:45 a.m. on Wednesday, May 18th, 1927. The rigged alarm in the basement of the school was alarming as planned. The alarm produced electricity, which then traveled down the wires, igniting the blasting caps, which in turn detonated the pyritol and dynamite. A boom unlike anything anyone in Bath had ever heard shook the town. The north wing of the school had exploded straight up off the ground 4 feet in the air, and then came crashing down with the roof landing on top of everything and everyone in the north wing. The entire school building shook. Neighboring homes had windows blown out from the blast. After the explosion, people ran to the school when they saw what happened. Then, just as planned, there were more timed explosions at the Kehoe farm. First an explosion in the home, and next the barn. Neighbors ran to the Kehoe farm to see what they could do to help. Some even ran into the house to see if anyone needed to be rescued. Once inside, they found wiring all over the place and a pile of dynamite in the corner of the living room. Without even thinking, one of the men grabbed the dynamite and threw it straight out the window. Before long, Andrew pulled up in front of his farm, yelling at the neighbors that they should all go over to the school to help over there, and then he drove away. Meanwhile, at the school, everyone was working together, trying to figure out how to lift the incredibly large and heavy roof off the pile of debris to allow them to get to the children and the teachers pinned below. People were digging through the rubble with their hands, pulling out the dead, hoping that they would find survivors. While the rescue was in full swing, Andrew pulled up in front of the school. He got out of his truck and spotted an all too familiar face. That's right. It was the superintendent of the school, the man he despised most for raising and levying his taxes, Emery Hike. Andrew was now standing outside by his truck when he called Emery over to him. Per eyewitnesses, the two men were in a heated discussion. Then, without warning, Andrew pulled out a gun and fired it into the back of his truck. This was the fourth and final explosion, which immediately killed Emery Hike, Andrew Kehoe, the town's postman, Andrew's father-in-law, and an 8-year-old boy who had survived the initial bombing by jumping out of the second-story window. Numerous others were also injured. Can you believe that?
That is insane.
Totally insane.
That is just insane.
8 years
so
old.
His hatred, basically, for this one guy, Emery Hike, had him kill numerous people and torture his wife.
Everybody was going to pay. There were body parts blasted up into trees, blasted into the bushes, and in the surrounding yards of their neighbors and all kinds of stuff. There's an article published in MLive that I read called 22 Things You May Not Have Known About the 1927 School Massacre by Julie Mack. Some of the aftermath findings of the bombings in the article taken from the book Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing by Arnie Bernstein. Quote, Kehoe's body was blown apart by his truck bomb. His intestines were hanging from the steering column, dripping with blood. Nellie Kehoe's charred body was found so badly burned, the authorities passed it by multiple times before they realized it was a corpse. After the truck bomb exploded, a woman in the crowd picked up what she thought was a stick, but it wasn't a stick at all. It was a human spinal column. A deputy sheriff saw the legs of a girl sticking out of the rubble. When he tugged on it, the foot snapped off in his hands. A young mother, a block away from the scene, was holding a baby when the truck bomb went off. A 2-inch square burr went into her eye, and another piece of shrapnel pierced her skull. Amazingly, she survived, but of course she's got brain damage. One of the 2 teachers killed was found buried in the rubble, holding 2 dead children. 2 children taken to the temporary morgue and covered with a sheet were later found to be alive. Oh my God.
Oh, Jesus.
On top of all that trauma done to wake up under a sheet in a morgue. When the fire chief of Bath went into the basement of the school, he had found hundreds of sticks of dynamite that had not exploded on the other side of the school. Had everything worked out as Andrew had planned, the entire school would have been leveled, killing everyone inside of it. The death toll would have been close to 250. Andrew took the lives of 38 children and 5 adults. 58 in total were injured at the school bombing site. Andrew had also taken the life of his wife, Nellie. I'm assuming she had burned to death in the wheelbarrow, which we know she did, and next to the chicken coop. In all, the death toll was 44, and that number does not include Andrew Kehoe. He doesn't count. That's what I say.
That sounds good to me.
Back at the Kehoe farm, the house and barn had been reduced to ash. Only the home's brick fireplace remained standing. Where the barn had once stood, rescuers found burned and destroyed farm equipment, and the bones of the horses were found with wire still around their legs. Andrew also made sure that he destroyed everything on the farm that could have been salvaged. He killed the trees by cutting down into the roots. He also cut the grapevines at ground level, so it would kill those as well. But he wanted to, make people think that everything was still viable, so he would prop those vines back up as if they were not cut. Investigators also found a sign made by Andrew, which he had placed in the fence where it would not be destroyed by the fire. It read, "Criminals are made, not born." As crazy as this sounds, it took 2 days to finally locate Nellie's burned body in the wheelbarrow, as this was because she was burned so badly they didn't recognize it was a person. So that was also kind of one of those things, the 22 things you didn't know. On top of Nellie's body, they found and opened the metal box that Andrew had placed on her. According to Bernstein's book, Governor Fred Greene, a Republican who was newly elected at the time of the massacre, had also rushed to the scene in Bath from Lansing to help look for survivors. He had offered to personally pay for funerals of those murdered if their families could not afford to do so. The governor had made quite a fortune in the furniture business, and I think that was a pretty darn cool thing for him to do. Donations were flying in from everywhere to help rebuild the school. Even inmates from the Ionia prison raised $200. That's a lot of money. It took some time, but the rubble had been cleaned up and a new wing was rebuilt. For a reason I could not locate, it was decided that the school should be torn down in 1975, and it was. Some of the other things, everybody was so traumatized. Any kids that were in the school and all that jazz, they're elderly at this point. Who wants to keep looking at the school? Traumatized everyone for their entire lives. This, I think, is really cool. Andrew Kehoe's name has been removed from county records, and before his land was sold, Every inch of that 80-acre farm was plowed to relieve any fears that wires and explosives still remain, because I would think that he did some more rigging, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would.
Can't trust him.
He was definitely sadistic, maniacal, and
diabolical.
Narcissistic, that everyone was to blame and he was going to make everyone pay. But he was chicken shit enough that he didn't even want to stick around to see them pay for it. So there's that.
Yeah. Lastly, there's a memorial park in Bath named James Cousins Memorial Park. It is a 2-acre park located on Main Street. You will see a memorial for the 1927 school bombing, as well as a veterans memorial, should you choose to visit and pay your respects. And this is something I'm definitely going to do. There you have it. The mark that Andrew Kehoe left in history, the devastatingly horrific Bath School bombing massacre that happened on May 18th, 1927. Also, something I want to bring up that I also didn't put in the story. So he killed these kids the day before their last day of school. Someone had approached him. I don't know who it was. I think it was a teacher, but because he had such a big piece of property, he had 80 acres, she had gone to him and asked him if he would host a big picnic for the kids on their last day of school, which is the day after the bombing. He was totally all about it. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah?
Because he knew they weren't going to be there, and he wasn't going to be there. The farm wasn't going to be there.
Oh my God. So he let them think that he was the bee's knees before he killed them all.
Yeah.
Ugh, this man is a piece of work, and I am certainly glad that he died a horribly painful death, and I hope that he stayed alive a little bit longer to enjoy it.
I wish he did too, but, it sounds like he just went kaboom and exploded. I mean, he's standing right next to a truck full of Pyritol and dynamite. I think he just blew to smithereens.
Just like the other story when I just changed the ending, I'm going to change this ending too. And he lived for a good 10 minutes in suffering pain.
I like your ending, just like I like the first one that we did.
Exactly. I'm changing it to include he died writhing in pain and everybody looked at him and watched him die.
And nobody would even throw a bucket of water on him.
Yeah, well, maybe the gasoline. A bucket of gasoline would have been helpful.
Can we get some gas in a match, please? Someone.
Unreal.
Yeah, so...
Unreal. I've never even heard about this. Ever.
To be honest, I didn't either. I don't even remember how I came upon this story, and a lot of people know this story. A lot of people remember. It's unlike anything I've ever heard.
You got all those facts, those 10 facts that you never knew.
Mm-hmm.
It came from a book?
It did. It came, what? Yes. It came.
Article? It
came from a book. There's actually a book. So it was the article on M Live that quoted from the book, and the book is called... I'd like to read it because I love books, and I'm sure there's just so much more detail here. But the book is called Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing by Arnie Bernstein.
It's a known thing, and there's a book about it, and there's been some articles about it, and I've never heard, unfortunately, with all of the other school issues that we've had over the years, at least in my lifetime. You would think that I would have heard about this before, but I've never heard about this. But he was definitely a sadistic sucker, narcissistic,
diabolical.
Delusional. I mean, the list goes on and on for this one.
Yeah, it sure does.
That was very morbid and very depressing. We're going to spice it up and say that he suffered horribly, and everybody in the town that survived heard him screaming for a very long time.
Yes, I like the ending much better.
Is that a bad thing? That the only thing that makes this horrible thing is to know that something horrible happened to him, more horrible than a quick, easy escape.
Yeah, because he deserves something horrible.
His own corner of hell somewhere. Okay, so the next one's not going to be this morbid, is it? Jeez. I mean, I know we're talking about murderers and whatnot.
They're all morbid.
This guy...
No, the next one's not good either. No kids, but it's bad.
Kids.
All right.
None of it's going to be good. I mean, come on.
It's all bad.
About murder.
We're talking about murder.
Serial killers.
The men's crazy.
You're just going to have to deal with me whining about it.
Yeah, I will. All right. Thank you, everyone. This was another great episode. Come back next Malice Monday for another dose of diabolicalness. Yep.
All right, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next Malice in the Monday.
Have a great week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.